I was standing right there, close enough to smell Mom's perfume, when she handed my sister a check so large it didn't feel real. $800,000. The number was printed in bold type across the center of the check, impossible to miss. My sister held it up for the photographer, her smile bright and perfect, while Mom wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Everyone clapped. Aunts and uncles who'd gathered for this special announcement crowded around, offering congratulations like my sister had just won an award. I was still holding the binder with my business proposal inside. The same binder Mom had pushed away barely an hour earlier, saying my request for $50,000 was too risky. Her exact words, delivered while she sorted through bills without even looking up at me. "I can't justify that kind of investment," she'd said. "It's just too uncertain, you understand." But this $800,000 handed to my sister for a project she dreamed up 3 weeks ago, this was somehow certain enough. My sister kissed Mom's cheek. Flash, another photo, more applause. And I stood there in the corner of the living room, pretending not to feel the sting spreading across my chest like fire. My name is Rowan of Vale, and that was the moment I realized I had been naive about where I stood in this family. About who they believed in, about who they'd already decided was worth investing in. When I walked out of the house, the air outside felt too thin. My hands shook so badly I could barely unlock my car. I fumbled with the keys 3 times before the door finally opened. I slid into the driver's seat and just sat there, staring at the dashboard, trying to breathe normally. Behind me, through the living room window, I could see them still celebrating. More pictures being taken. My sister holding that enormous check like a prop in some glamorous photo shoot. I kept hearing Mom's voice in my head. "It's different with your sister." That's what she'd said when I'd asked why. When I'd pointed out that my business plan was detailed, researched, based on actual market analysis. When I'd reminded her that I'd been working toward this for 2 years while my sister had barely mentioned her idea until last month. "It's different with your sister," Mom had repeated, her tone suggesting I should just understand without her having to explain. And maybe that was the worst part, that she didn't even think she owed me an explanation. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, wondering how they'd managed to shrink me down to nothing without raising their voices. How they'd made me feel invisible while smiling at me the whole time. Finally, I started the engine and drove away. I didn't look back at the house. That night, lying in bed unable to sleep, I thought back to childhood. The pattern had always been there. I'd just been too close to see it clearly. School events where my accomplishments were dismissed as expected because I studied hard, while my sister's smallest efforts were treated like miracles. Teachers praised me constantly, honor roll every semester, academic awards, leadership positions. My family would nod politely and change the subject. But when my sister made the volleyball team, there was a celebration dinner, balloons, a cake with her name on it. When I got accepted to 3 universities with scholarship offers. "That's nice, honey. Don't forget to take out the trash." When my sister got accepted to 1 university with no scholarship, they threw a party and invited the extended family. She got celebrated for doing things once. I got questioned for doing things 10 times better. "Why are you working so hard?" Mom would ask me, her tone suggesting there was something wrong with ambition. But my sister's casual approach to everything was refreshing and confident. I remembered a teacher once telling Mom that I had real potential for leadership, and Mom responding with, "Well, she's always been a bit intense." Intense, as if caring about my future was somehow a flaw. I realized this wasn't new. The stakes were just higher now. Money made the inequality impossible to ignore. When I got home, after that awful day, I placed my business binder on the dining table. I'd spent months on this proposal. Sleepless nights researching market trends, consumer behavior, competitive analysis. I'd created financial projections for 3 years, outlined realistic growth scenarios, identified potential risks and mitigation strategies. The binder was thick with documentation, letters of interest from potential clients, preliminary agreements with suppliers, cost breakdowns, marketing plans. Every page represented hours of work, days of hope. Looking at it now, I felt an ache deeper than anger. It wasn't just the rejection that hurt, it was the way it happened. Careless, quick, effortless. Mom had barely glanced at the executive summary before pushing it aside. She'd been more interested in the bills she was sorting, electric, water, credit card statements, than in the future I was trying to build. As if what mattered to me never required thought. As if my dreams were just background noise in a house where my sister's wishes were commands. I picked up the binder and flipped through the pages one more time. The numbers were solid. The plan was viable. Multiple business consultants I'd reached out to online had said the same thing. This could work. But none of that mattered to the one person whose support I'd needed. I closed the binder and pushed it away. For the first time, I let myself consider that maybe I'd been asking the wrong people all along. I tried to calmly talk to Mom the next morning. I found her in the garden, watering her plants, humming softly to herself. The morning sun was bright, the air still cool. It should have been peaceful. "Mom, can we talk about yesterday?" She barely paused, adjusting the spray nozzle on the hose. "What about it?" "About the money. About why my $50,000 is too risky, but $800,000 for my sister isn't." "Your tone is accusatory," she said immediately, not even looking at me. "I don't appreciate being interrogated in my own garden." "I'm not interrogating you. I'm trying to understand." "You're too emotional about this, Rowena. You always have been. Too emotional about everything." The word landed like a slap. Emotional. As if having feelings about being treated unfairly made me irrational. "I have to be strategic with family resources," she continued, moving to the next plant. "Your sister's project has more immediate potential. She has connections. She knows people. It's different." "Different how?" She finally looked at me, her expression tired and slightly annoyed. "Why are you making this so difficult? Your sister needs this opportunity. You're resourceful. You'll figure something else out. You always do." Her voice was soft, almost kind, but every word felt like it was cutting me down. I stood there in the morning sunlight, watching her water her roses, and realized she genuinely didn't see the problem. She didn't see me at all. By evening, the family group chat exploded with messages. My phone buzzed continuously for 2 hours. I watched the notification count climb. 47 messages, 58, 73, 89. The chat, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone, was suddenly full of opinions about gratitude, respect, and family unity. "We all have to support each other," one aunt wrote. "Sometimes parents know best," added an uncle I hadn't spoken to in years. "Rowena, you need to remember everything your mother has done for you," my grandmother chimed in. Mom had told her version of events first. In her telling, I'd created a scene at my sister's celebration. I'd been disrespectful and ungrateful. I'd made everything about myself instead of being happy for my sister. Cousins who hadn't spoken to me in months suddenly had advice. Relatives I'd never been close to felt qualified to lecture me about family values. Nobody asked for my side of the story. Nobody questioned why I might be hurt. Nobody seemed to think there might be another perspective worth considering. I watched the messages come in until the chat felt like a courtroom where I was being judged without being heard. "Maybe you should apologize," one cousin suggested. 15 people liked that message. "Family is everything," another wrote, 23 likes. I typed and deleted responses for an hour. Finally, I just turned my phone face down and walked away. Let them have their echo chamber. I was done performing for an audience that had already decided I was the villain. A cousin sent me screenshots privately the next day. "I thought you should see these," the message read. "I'm sorry." The screenshots showed a conversation in a separate group chat, one I wasn't included in. Mom talking to several relatives about both me and my sister. Giving Rowena money would be a waste, Mom had written. She's just not business-minded, never has been. Someone had asked about my plan. Mom's response, "It's very detailed, but that doesn't mean it's good. She overthinks everything, gets stuck in analysis paralysis. Can't see the forest for the trees." Another message from a few days earlier. "My sister is the real achiever, always has been. She has that spark, that natural confidence. Rowena has to work twice as hard for half the result." Seeing those words in writing felt different than hearing them spoken. More final, more cruel. It was like watching someone carve my name out of my own family tree with deliberate, careful strokes. I read the screenshots 3 times, my hands shaking harder with each pass. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't Mom being protective or cautious with money. This was her actual opinion of me, shared casually with relatives, presented as simple fact. I wasn't business-minded. I overthought things. I lacked my sister's natural spark. In her mind, I was already a failure. The money was irrelevant. She decided long ago that I wasn't worth betting on. I thanked my cousin for sending the screenshots and then sat alone in my apartment, staring at my phone until the screen went dark. I didn't yell. I didn't defend myself in the group chat. I didn't call Mom and demand an explanation. I didn't plead my case or send long messages explaining why I deserved better. I simply closed my phone, set it on my nightstand, and sat on my bed in the quiet of my small apartment. A deep, exhausted silence settled over me. The kind of silence that comes after you've finally stopped fighting a battle you were never going to win. If they wanted to underestimate me, I would let them. If they wanted to believe I was incapable, unambitious, destined to fail, fine. I was done performing worthiness for people who had already decided I had none. I thought about all the times I'd tried to prove myself, all the achievements I'd hoped would make them see me differently. The scholarships, the jobs, the careful planning, the responsible choices. None of it had mattered, because they'd made up their minds about who I was before I'd even had a chance to become myself. My sister was the golden child. I was the supporting character. That was the role they'd assigned me, and nothing I did was going to change the script. But here's what I realized in that quiet moment. I didn't need to change the script. I just needed to leave the play. I needed to build something so completely separate from them that their opinions became irrelevant. And that's exactly what I was going to do. I sought out a small business mentor, someone completely outside the family bubble. His name was Felix, and I found him through a local entrepreneur networking group. He was in his 50s, had built and sold 2 successful companies, and now spent his time advising startups. We met at a coffee shop downtown. I brought my binder, expecting another dismissal, another lecture about being realistic. Instead, Felix spent 90 minutes going through my proposal page by page. He asked questions, made notes, challenged some of my assumptions in ways that actually made the plan stronger. "This is solid," he finally said, closing the binder and looking at me directly. "Really solid. The market analysis is thorough. Your financial projections are conservative, which is smart. You've identified real problems and proposed practical solutions." I felt something loosen in my chest. "You think it could work?" "I think it could absolutely work. Why hasn't this been funded yet?" "My family said it was too risky." He raised an eyebrow. "Based on what analysis?" "None, they just said it." Felix shook his head. "That's not a business decision. That's a personal one, and it tells me more about them than about your plan." For the first time in months, someone spoke to me as if my ideas were solid, not delusional. As if I was capable, not confused. His confidence in my work steadied something inside me that I'd thought was broken beyond repair. Over the next weeks, I rebuilt my business from the ground up. Not because the original plan was bad, but because I needed to strip away every assumption I'd made about family support. I needed a model that didn't depend on them at all. I adjusted the financial projections to start with less capital. I researched alternative funding sources, microloans, grants, angel investors who specialized in startups run by women. I refined my pitch, cutting unnecessary parts and focusing on the core value proposition. I identified which expenses were essential and which were just nice to have. The business got leaner, sharper, more focused. Felix met with me twice a week, helping me navigate challenges I hadn't even known to anticipate. He introduced me to other entrepreneurs who shared their experiences, their failures, their breakthroughs. I learned that most successful businesses don't start with giant checks from family members. They start with determination, creativity, and the ability to do more with less. It felt like sweeping the floor of a house I'd lived in blindly for years, finally seeing what actually needed to be there and what was just clutter. I cut my budget by 60%. I found cheaper suppliers. I identified free marketing channels. I built partnerships with other small businesses that created mutual value without requiring cash up front. By the end of the month, I had a plan that could work with $15,000 instead of $50,000. And I had a waiting list of potential investors Felix had connected me with. I didn't need my family anymore. I just needed to stop believing I did. An angel investor named Simone responded to one of my outreach emails. She ran a fund specifically focused on women-owned businesses in their early stages. We had a video call scheduled for a Tuesday morning, and I was so nervous I could barely sleep the night before. The call started with her asking me to walk her through the business concept without looking at notes. Just talk about it like I was explaining it to a friend. So I did. I told her about the problem I'd identified, the gap in the market, the solution I'd developed. I explained who my customers would be and why they'd care. She asked tough questions, really tough. Questions about scalability, competitive advantages, customer acquisition costs, long-term sustainability. But unlike my family, she asked because she was actually trying to understand. She was stress-testing the concept to see if it would hold up under real market conditions. After 45 minutes, she sat back in her chair and smiled. "This is one of the most innovative concepts I've seen in a long time," she said. "You've clearly thought through every angle. Your market research is excellent. I'm impressed." Hearing that from a stranger meant more than any family praise ever would, because she had no reason to lie to me, no obligation to make me feel better. She didn't fund the entire project. She never did on first investments. But she funded the first phase, $15,000 to build the prototype and test the market. That was enough to begin. When my sister found out I was moving forward without family help, she laughed. We ran into each other at a grocery store, both reaching for the same brand of coffee. The universe has a sense of humor. "Rowena, I heard you're still doing that business thing." Her tone was amused, like I was insisting on believing in Santa Claus. "You're really doing this alone? Why?" "Because I can," I said simply. She shook her head, smiling in that way that made me feel small. "You know you're not built for this kind of pressure, right? Business is brutal. You need support. You need resources. You need," she gestured vaguely, "backing." It was almost word for word what Mom had said. I wondered if they'd rehearsed it. "I have backing," I told her, "just not from family." "Some random investor who doesn't even know you," she laughed again. "That's not the same. Look, there's no shame in admitting you need help. You could always." "I don't need help," I interrupted. "I'm good." She looked at me like I just said something incredibly naive. "Okay, well, good luck with that." She walked away, still shaking her head, amused by my apparent delusion. I stood there holding my coffee, feeling the familiar sting of being dismissed. But beneath it, something else had started growing, something harder, more determined. A resolve that thickened every time they doubted me. They could keep laughing, I'd keep building. We'd see who was right. My sister announced her project online, with all the fanfare money could buy. Professional photography, a slick website that must have cost thousands. Glossy social media posts with captions about family support and believing in your dreams, and when your family invests in your vision. The posts featured her in expensive outfits, standing in front of what looked like a professionally designed office space. Everything was polished, perfect, curated. I watched the likes roll in, comments praising her ambition, her sophistication, her inspiring journey. I sat at my small desk in my apartment, working on a laptop that overheated if I ran too many programs at once. No photographer, no professional office, just me, a growing to-do list, and a determination that was starting to feel less like hope and more like steel. And yet, for the first time, I didn't envy her. I didn't wish I had what she had, the money, the support, the easy path. Because I was learning something she'd never have to learn, how to build something from nothing, how to solve problems with creativity instead of cash, how to value every small victory because I'd earned it entirely on my own. I felt something closer to freedom than I'd felt in years. She could have the glossy photos and the family backing. I'd take the real work and the real accomplishment any day. I worked quietly for the next 6 months. No announcements, no social media updates, no asking anyone to validate what I was building. Just work, pure, steady, relentless work. Days blurred into each other. I woke up at 5 a.m. to work before my day job. I spent lunch breaks handling customer inquiries. I used evenings and weekends to refine the product, improve processes, build systems. No one congratulated me. No one offered encouragement. My phone was quiet except for business emails and messages from Felix checking on my progress. But the progress was real. Sales trickled in at first, 5 orders the first week, then 10, then 20. Customers left positive reviews. They recommended me to friends. Word spread slowly but genuinely. Feedback came in, and I used it to improve the product immediately. I wasn't precious about my original vision. I adjusted based on what customers actually wanted, not what I'd assumed they'd want. My tiny team, just me and a freelance designer I'd hired in another country, became surprisingly efficient. We communicated well. We solved problems fast. We built something lean and effective. I reinvested every dollar of profit back into the business. Better materials, improved packaging, small marketing tests. The work was exhausting. There were nights I fell asleep at my desk, nights I questioned if I was crazy for doing this. But there was also something deeply satisfying about building without applause, about knowing the success was mine because I'd done it alone. A well-known lifestyle blogger featured my business unexpectedly. I didn't pitch her. I didn't pay for the placement. She'd simply ordered from my website, loved the product, and decided to write about it. Her post went live on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday evening, orders had doubled. By Wednesday, my website nearly crashed from traffic. I remember staring at the screen, watching the order notifications flood in. Too stunned to process what was happening. This wasn't viral fame. I wasn't getting millions of views or becoming an overnight sensation. But it was validation. Real, tangible validation that my work mattered to people beyond my immediate circle. The blogger had written about the quality, the thoughtful design, the attention to detail. She'd mentioned that it was clear the business was run by someone who truly cares about her customers. Reading that made me cry. Not sad tears, but the kind of tears that come from being seen accurately for the first time. Someone understood what I was trying to build. Someone valued the care I'd put into every decision. Felix called when he saw the post. "This is huge, Rowena. This is the kind of organic endorsement you can't buy." "I know," I said, my voice shaky with emotion I couldn't quite name. "You did this. No family money, no shortcuts, just good work." "I did this," I repeated, letting the words sink in. For the first time, I believed them. Unexpectedly, family members started getting curious. Cousins who hadn't responded to my messages in months suddenly texted asking what I'd been up to. Aunts who'd sided with Mom in the group chat wanted to know if I was still doing that thing. Their tone had shifted from dismissive to nosy, like they'd heard something interesting and wanted to confirm whether the rumors were true. "I heard you started a business," one aunt messaged. "How's that going?" "Still working on it," I replied, offering nothing extra. "Are you making any money yet?" another cousin asked. "It's growing steadily." "That blogger who mentioned you, that's pretty cool," my sister's best friend commented on an old post. I answered everyone politely, briefly, giving no details that could be used as ammunition later. I owed them no explanations. They'd had their chance to be part of this journey. They'd chosen to mock it instead. Now they wanted information, so they could decide whether to be supportive or continue being dismissive. I wasn't interested in their conditional approval. Meanwhile, orders kept coming in. Reviews kept improving. Simone, my investor, was impressed enough to introduce me to other potential investors for the next growth phase. My business was building momentum, and it had nothing to do with whether my family believed in it. That felt powerful in a way I couldn't quite articulate. Word quietly spread that my sister's expensive project wasn't going as planned. I didn't hear it from family. They were keeping that information close. I heard it from mutual friends, from people in overlapping social circles, from the way my sister's once frequent social media posts had slowed to almost nothing. Costs were apparently ballooning beyond the original budget. Deadlines were missed. The contractors she'd hired were unreliable. Permits that should have been easy to get were tied up in bureaucracy. Things that seem simple when you have money suddenly weren't so simple when the execution mattered. Her glossy office space sat mostly empty. The expensive branding hadn't translated into actual customers. The connections she'd boasted about weren't opening doors the way she'd expected. I didn't celebrate her struggles. I didn't feel vindicated or smug. I just observed, realizing how fragile confidence becomes when it's built entirely on other people's support rather than your own competence. My sister had never had to figure things out alone. She'd never had to solve problems with limited resources. She'd never had to push through doubt without a safety net. And now, when things got difficult, she didn't have the resilience to handle it. Money, I was learning, couldn't buy the skills you developed from struggling. It couldn't buy the creativity that came from working with constraints. It could buy a glossy start, but it couldn't buy a sustainable business. That required something else entirely. Mom called me 3 months later, not to apologize, but to ask questions. "Rowena, honey, I need some advice. Hypothetically speaking, if a business was running over budget, what would you do?" Her voice was careful, neutral, like she was asking about the weather. "It depends on why it's over budget," I said. "Let's say, poor planning, and contractors who keep adding unexpected costs. Then you'd need to renegotiate contracts, cut unnecessary expenses, and maybe scale back the scope until the finances stabilize. And if investors were getting concerned, are we still speaking hypothetically?" She was quiet for a moment. "Your sister's project is having some challenges." "I see. I'm just trying to understand business concepts I don't really understand. You seem to have figured some of this out." She was clearly worried about the money she'd poured into my sister's project. $800,000 was a lot to lose. I answered her questions neutrally, professionally, without emotion. I gave her the information she was asking for without offering advice she hadn't requested. It wasn't my job to solve their crisis. They'd made their choice about who to invest in. Now they got to live with the consequences. "Thank you, dear," Mom said at the end of the call. "This was helpful." "You're welcome." She didn't ask about my business. Didn't acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, I'd known what I was talking about all along. But her call told me everything I needed to know. The doubt was starting. My sister called 2 weeks later asking if I could advise her project. "You've been doing the business thing for a while now," she said, her voice careful. "And I heard Mom talk to you about some stuff. I was thinking maybe you could help me figure out some issues I'm having." "What kind of issues?" "Just operational stuff, managing costs, that kind of thing. You have more free time than me, so I thought maybe. I don't have free time, I interrupted. I work 80-hour weeks. Oh, well, still, you've been doing this longer. 3 months longer than you. Right, but you didn't have the same pressure I have. Your business is smaller, simpler. Mine is more complex, more moving parts. Then you should hire a business consultant, I suggested. Someone who specializes in complex operations. Those are expensive. I almost laughed. She'd started with $800,000 and was worried about consulting fees. I can send you some names if you want, I offered. But I don't have the bandwidth to advise another business. I'm focused on growing mine. The shock in her voice was almost comical. You're saying no. I'm saying I can't help right now. I've got my hands full. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there for a moment, processing what had just happened. My sister, who'd laughed at my delusional plan to go it alone, had just asked me for help. The same sister who'd said I wasn't built for pressure. The irony was almost poetic. My own business grew, past all expectations over the next 6 months. Revenue tripled. I hired my first full-time employee, then a second. Orders came in faster than I could fulfill them, which meant I got to expand production. Investors who'd originally ignored my emails circled back. We heard great things about your company. Would you be open to a conversation? A small partnership offer arrived from a company I'd admired for years. They wanted to carry my products in their retail locations. I negotiated carefully, making sure any partnership protected what I'd built. I'd learned to value what I'd created, to not give it away cheap just because I was flattered by the attention. For the first time in my adult life, I felt entirely self-created, not defined by my family's opinion, not limited by their lack of faith, not waiting for their approval to feel legitimate. My bank account was healthy, my business was profitable, my team was small but talented, my customers were loyal. I'd built something sustainable and real. Not with a massive check, not with family connections, not with glossy branding and expensive consultants. Just with work and persistence, and the quiet, stubborn refusal to believe the people who'd said I couldn't. Felix took me out to dinner to celebrate hitting our revenue goals. You should be proud, he said. Most startups fail, you beat the odds. We beat the odds, I corrected, including him in the success. No, he smiled. This was you, I just got to watch. The family dynamic shifted noticeably after my business started getting press attention. A local business magazine featured me in their Entrepreneurs to Watch section. The article talked about bootstrapping, resilience, building a company without major investors. Suddenly, Mom became overly complimentary on the phone. I always knew you had it in you, she said, rewriting history with astonishing ease. Relatives who'd lectured me about respect suddenly praised my determination in the family group chat. My sister's smiles turned brittle at family gatherings. She'd congratulate me through gritted teeth, her eyes not quite matching her words. They weren't being kind, they were being strategic. My independence had disrupted the dynamic they'd relied on, the one where I was the struggling, less favored daughter who could be counted on to be grateful for scraps. Now I didn't need scraps. I didn't need anything from them. And that made them uncomfortable. They could no longer use money or support as leverage. They couldn't dangle approval to control my choices. I'd built something entirely separate from their influence. I watched them adjust their behavior, trying to figure out the new rules of engagement, trying to position themselves as supportive, as if they'd been on my side all along. I let them rewrite the narrative, if it made them feel better. But I didn't forget the real story. I kept the screenshots. I remembered every dismissal. Not for revenge, just for clarity, to remind myself who I was really building this for. Myself and no one else. My sister's project failed publicly 8 months after it launched. The announcement came through social media, a carefully worded post about taking a step back and reassessing priorities and learning valuable lessons. But the real story leaked through other channels. Angry contractors posting about unpaid bills, customers demanding refunds for products that were never delivered, a scathing review from someone who'd visited the office space and found it mostly empty. The details emerged gradually. Financial mismanagement, overspending on appearances while neglecting operations, broken promises to partners and vendors. The expensive branding couldn't hide that the fundamental business had never been sound. The humiliation was brutal. Comments on her posts ranged from sympathetic to scathing. People who'd praised her launch now questioned how she'd managed to fail so spectacularly with such significant resources. Mom tried to control the narrative, posting about being proud of my sister for trying and learning. But the story spread faster than she could manage it. For once, the spotlight wasn't flattering. The perfect family image cracked. I felt no satisfaction watching it happen, just a sad sort of understanding. My sister had never learned to build things herself. She'd been handed opportunities her whole life and never developed the skills to sustain them. And $800,000 couldn't buy what experience and failure teach you. I sent my sister a brief text. "I'm sorry this is hard. I'm here if you need to talk." She never responded. Mom came to my place a month later, something she'd never done before. She knocked hesitantly, waiting for me to invite her in like she was a guest instead of my mother. She sat on my couch, looking around my apartment like she was seeing it for the first time. Which she basically was. "You've done well for yourself," she said quietly. "Thank you." She fidgeted with her purse. "I wanted to ask you something. How did you build all this without help, without support?" I thought about all the nights I'd worked until 2 a.m., all the problems I'd solved alone, all the doubts I'd pushed through. "I had help," I said. "Just not from family. I found mentors, investors, people who believed in the work." "But we're your family," she said, and for the first time she looked unsure, uncertain. "We should have been the ones helping you." "Yes," I agreed. "You should have been." "I made a mistake," she admitted. I thought your sister had a better chance. She's always been so confident, so sure of herself." And I wasn't. "You were always questioning things, second-guessing. I thought that meant you weren't ready." "What it meant," I said carefully, "was that I was being thorough. I was actually thinking things through instead of just assuming they'd work out." She nodded slowly. Then, "Your sister is struggling. Could you maybe guide her, help her figure out?" "No." The word sat between us, clear and final. "I'm focused on my own path now," I said gently. "I don't have bandwidth to fix someone else's." Mom left shortly after. We hugged at the door, but it felt different, like we both finally understood where we stood. My business expanded into a physical location a year later. Not a massive space, just a small storefront in a nice neighborhood where customers could see products in person, where my small team could work together instead of remotely. I opened the doors with people who'd supported me because they chose to, not because they shared my blood. Felix came. Simone came. My employees came. Customers who'd been with me since the beginning came. My family got an invitation, but I didn't push when they said they might not be able to make it. The opening was small but meaningful. I gave a short speech about building something from scratch, about the people who'd believed in the work when it was just an idea. I felt light, rooted, proud. This was the moment I'd begged my family to help me create, the moment they'd said was too risky. And I'd built it anyway, without them, despite them. Felix hugged me after the ribbon cutting. "Remember when you came to that coffee shop with your binder? You looked so defeated." "I remember. Look at you now." I looked around the store, my store, filled with people celebrating work I'd done with my own hands and mind. "Yeah," I said softly, "look at me now." This was what $50,000 could have built, but $800,000 to my sister couldn't buy. Competence, resilience, the real kind of confidence that comes from actually doing the work. This was mine, completely, entirely, undeniably mine. I attended a family dinner months later, the first in over a year. Walking into my parents' house felt different. I wasn't the same person who'd left with a rejected business proposal. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't desperate for approval. The dynamic had shifted. Mom asked careful questions about my business, actually listening to the answers. My sister was polite but distant, the rivalry drained out of her by failure. Relatives who dismissed me were now curious, asking for advice, wanting to know my secret. "There's no secret," I told them. "Just work and refusing to quit when people say you can't." Later, helping with dishes, Mom stood beside me at the sink. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "I should have said that sooner, should have believed in you sooner." "Yes," I agreed. "You should have." "Can you forgive me?" I thought about the screenshots, the group chat, the way she'd called my work a waste, the $800,000 she'd given my sister without hesitation. "I don't know yet," I said honestly, "but I'm not angry anymore, that's something." She nodded, accepting that truth. Driving home later, I thought about everything that had happened. The rejection that had felt like the end had actually been the beginning. They hadn't robbed me of anything. Their doubt had simply pushed me toward a version of myself they never imagined possible. A version that didn't need their money, or approval, or belief. A version that had built something real from 2 words. Too risky. And in that quiet victory, I realized something freeing. I'd won. Not by destroying them, but by becoming someone they couldn't diminish. The strongest revenge was just living well. And I was living very well indeed.